The chamber was older than most civilizations present within it, carved from materials whose names no longer translated cleanly into modern language. Light bent gently across its surfaces, refracted through banners that represented empires spanning thousands of systems. The air carried the weight of exhaustion. This war had been argued into existence here, sustained here, and now, slowly, it was dying here. Species that once arrived with fleets now sent recordings. Others no longer sent anything at all. The enemy did not need to be described in detail anymore. Everyone knew its pattern. Systems silenced. Stars harvested. Cultures erased with surgical efficiency. The war was not fueled by rage or ideology. It was fueled by inevitability. And inevitability was winning. Around the chamber, delegates spoke in measured tones that barely concealed fear. Tactical projections hovered, showing red expanding across mapped regions of space. Defensive lines collapsed not because they were weak, but because they were finite. Every strategy proposed relied on endurance, and endurance had become a liability. The galaxy had spent centuries trying to outlast something that did not tire. There were arguments, of course. Always arguments. Calls for unity. Calls for sacrifice. Calls for miracles. But no one spoke with confidence anymore. Even the oldest species, those who remembered when the war was young, had begun to frame their words in the past tense. Survival had narrowed into delay. At the far perimeter of the chamber sat a delegation most of the council forgot was present. Their station was modest. Their technology unremarkable by galactic standards. Their species' name rarely appeared in strategic briefings except as a footnote, peripheral, neutral, non-aligned. Humanity. A late arrival to interstellar affairs, tucked away in a quiet spiral arm, far from the primary corridors of conflict. They had never been conquered, but they had also never led. The galaxy found this easy to dismiss. When their representative requested the floor, the request was queued behind others. Then bypassed. Then quietly expired. No one objected. There were larger concerns. Civilizations were burning. No one needed commentary from a species whose greatest contribution to the war effort was staying out of it. A senior delegate finally addressed the oversight, more out of protocol than curiosity. Humanity, they said, had chosen wisely in remaining neutral. The war was not theirs. Their worlds were distant. Their fleets limited. Survival through obscurity was not shameful. It was practical. Others agreed. Some even sounded relieved. One less responsibility. One less fragile ally to protect. Humanity's absence from the battlefield had become a background constant, like cosmic radiation. Always there. Never questioned. What no one discussed was how thoroughly humanity had been watching. They had not protested exclusions. They had not requested technology. They had not asked for protection treaties or evacuation corridors. They had accepted every dismissal with silence. While empires burned through generations of commanders, humanity sent the same representative. While strategies evolved reactively, humans refined projections patiently. While others fought to preserve what they had, humans calculated what could not be saved. As the Council moved toward a final vote, one that would commit what remained of their combined fleets to a defensive stand doomed to fail, the human delegates stood without authorization. There was no urgency in the movement. No defiance. Just inevitability. For the first time in centuries, the chamber fell quiet without being asked. The war had reached the point where hope was no longer being debated. Only timing. And somewhere, deep beneath the Council's fatigue, an uncomfortable realization surfaced too late to stop it. Humanity had not been irrelevant. Humanity had been deciding. The human did not raise their voice. That alone unsettled the chamber. Most speakers here relied on resonance, subharmonics, or psychic amplification to force attention. The human used none of it. They spoke as if being heard was inevitable. They began by apologizing, not for interrupting, but for the inefficiency of the discussion. That word drew reactions. Several delegates bristled. Inefficiency was a luxury complaint in a war measured in extinction counts. The human acknowledged the offense and continued anyway. They stated calmly that the Council had already lost. Not would lose. Had lost. The war was over in every simulation that relied on incremental escalation. Shields failed because they were designed to endure, not adapt. Fleets failed because they fought to survive, not to conclude. The enemy did not fear losses. The Council did. That imbalance had decided the outcome long before the current vote. A senior strategist demanded clarification. Humanity, they reminded the chamber, had no standing to critique a war it refused to fight. The human accepted this without protest and replied that neutrality did not equal ignorance. It had allowed clarity. Humanity had observed every major engagement, catalogued every defeat, modeled every retreat. While others reacted emotionally to loss, humans treated loss as data. The human explained that most species viewed war as a contest. Humanity did not. Humans viewed it as a systems problem. Once framed that way, the solutions changed. You did not trade blows. You removed inputs. You collapsed feedback loops. You denied recovery. Another delegate accused the human of arrogance. The human corrected them. This was not arrogance. It was diagnosis. The galaxy was attempting to outlast something that had no internal pressure to stop. Time favored the enemy. Every year spent debating ethics was another year the enemy used to refine efficiency. The human was asked why, if all this was known, humanity had remained silent. The reply came without hesitation. Because joining early would have forced compromise. Compromise would have meant partial measures. Partial measures would have prolonged the war. Humanity did not enter conflicts to manage them. Humanity entered to end them. The chamber grew tense. Several species exchanged private signals. This was no longer a request for aid. It was an evaluation. The human continued, describing a trait most humans shared and few species understood. Humans assumed failure by default. Every plan began with the expectation that something would go catastrophically wrong. Systems were built to function after loss, not before it. Victory was never assumed. Collapse always was. That mindset shaped everything humans built, including their approach to war. They admitted something that surprised the Council. Humanity did not know if the galaxy would survive this conflict. Not because of the enemy, but because of the choices being made. Endless defense was not mercy. It was hesitation disguised as morality. Then the human delivered the sentence that changed the room. Humanity had not been deciding whether it could win. Humanity had been deciding whether intervention would be worth the cost. Not resources. Not lives. Cost to identity. Because the moment humanity joined, restraint would end. The war would stop being about balance. It would become about removal. Entire methodologies would be abandoned. Entire assumptions invalidated. The human paused, allowing the implications to settle. No threat was issued. None was needed. They finished by stating that humanity had reached a conclusion. The galaxy was not losing because it lacked strength. It was losing because it refused to accept finality. The challenge arrived without hostility. A senior coalition figure asked a single question and waited for silence to answer it. Proof was required. Not intention, not theory, not confidence. Proof of preparation. If humanity had truly been observing rather than hiding, the Council wanted something measurable. The human did not argue. They responded by activating a restrained projection, narrow in scope and deliberately unimpressive. Maps of known space unfolded, layered with time-indexed data. Points marked enemy advances, then rewound, then collapsed into alternate outcomes. The human clarified that these were not forecasts. They were resolved simulations. Millions of them, each beginning from a position of disadvantage. Humanity never modeled success first. That approach was considered irresponsible. Every scenario began with catastrophic failure and worked backward from survival. The display shifted to infrastructure. Shipyards appeared, not near stars or trade routes, but suspended in gravitational interference where sensors lost coherence. Production chains operated without fixed locations. Components moved independently, assembling only when required. Humanity had learned that permanence attracted attention. So they designed systems meant to vanish between observations. Weapons data followed. There were no glowing arcs or exotic emissions. Humanity favored interactions that required no negotiation with physics. Dense mass accelerated to relativistic velocities. Autonomous guidance adjusted trajectories after launch. Defensive barriers were irrelevant because the weapons did not target ships. They targeted space itself, collapsing regions until nothing functional remained within them. A delegate objected, stating this doctrine erased any distinction between combatant and territory. The human agreed. That distinction only mattered in conflicts meant to continue. Humanity did not fight wars intended to evolve. Once violence reached a certain threshold, the objective became termination of capability, not control of behavior. Questions followed rapidly. Ethics. Escalation. Precedent. The human answered each without emotion. Ethics governed whether to enter a war. Once entered, responsibility replaced permission. Humanity did not outsource consequences to committees or treaties. If destruction followed, it would be owned, not rationalized. The projection displayed outcome curves. Enemy operational capacity spiked briefly, then dropped to zero. Not gradually. Not after negotiation. Entire command structures ceased emitting signals within defined windows. The human noted that the enemy's culture interpreted delay as weakness and restraint as inefficiency. Prolonged engagement only refined the enemy's methods. Another layer appeared, showing command architecture. Human fleets operated with decentralized autonomy. No single failure could halt progression. Orders were not updated mid-conflict because objectives did not change. If commanders were lost, systems adapted. If entire formations vanished, remaining assets recalculated and continued. Human war doctrine assumed isolation, silence, and irreversible loss as standard conditions. The chamber grew still. This was not desperation revealed. It was preparation normalized. The human addressed the reaction directly. Humanity did not take pride in this capability. That was precisely why it was hidden. Revealed power altered negotiations, distorted alliances, and invited dependency. Underestimation preserved balance. It kept other species honest and forced humanity to remain cautious. They concluded with a final comparison. Every model in which humanity intervened decisively resulted in fewer total deaths than any scenario involving prolonged defense or negotiated containment. Time multiplied casualties. Finality reduced them. The projection ended. The human waited. The galaxy now understood that humanity had not been idle. It had been preparing for an ending others were afraid to accept. The Council's response was not applause or outrage. It was calculation. Several delegates exchanged rapid signals, assessing cost, leverage, precedent. One finally asked what humanity required in exchange for intervention. Territory. Resources. Command authority. Guarantees. The human listened, then shook their head. Nothing was requested. The clarification unsettled the room more than any demand could have. Wars were transactional. Even desperation carried conditions. To fight without asking for compensation implied either moral vanity or something far more dangerous, freedom from consequence. The human explained that humanity did not enter wars to profit from them. Profit distorted objectives. It extended timelines. It complicated endings. Another delegate pressed further. Why intervene now? Why not earlier, when losses might have been smaller? The answer came evenly. Because earlier intervention would have preserved the war's structure. It would have encouraged negotiation. The enemy would have adapted. Humanity had waited until adaptation no longer mattered. The humans stated that the enemy had crossed a threshold humanity recognized instinctively. Not strategic dominance. Not territorial expansion. Erasure. The deliberate removal of cultures, histories, and futures. Humans understood that pattern. Their own past was defined by near misses with it. When extinction became policy rather than collateral, neutrality ceased to be ethical. Silence followed. Then a signal cut through the chamber, alerts cascading across multiple delegates simultaneously. Long-range sensors registered mass anomalies across distant sectors. Not arrivals. Reveals. Human fleets disengaging from concealment fields they had maintained for decades. Hundreds of formations, each operating independently, each already positioned along enemy logistics corridors. The human did not look at the data. They already knew it was happening. Someone demanded confirmation. The human provided it with a single sentence, spoken without emphasis. "We're joining the war now." There was no rallying speech. No declaration of unity. No call for valor. Humanity did not ask permission to lead or invite others to follow. The declaration was not meant to inspire. It was meant to inform. Across the galaxy, the effects were immediate. Enemy forward relays failed within minutes, not from attack but from absence. Space collapsed where command nodes had been. Supply chains terminated mid-transfer as regions of transit ceased to exist. Fleets prepared for engagement, and found no targets capable of receiving orders. The Council attempted to reassert coordination, to ask how this fit within existing battle plans. The human answered honestly. It didn't. Existing plans assumed continuity. Humanity's approach assumed removal. A delegate accused humanity of risking total annihilation if the enemy responded in kind. The human acknowledged the risk. Then added that the enemy had never hesitated to risk everything. That asymmetry was the reason it had advanced so far. Humanity was correcting it. Reports continued to arrive. Enemy counteroffensives failed before they formed. Entire theaters went dark without registering combat. The war did not escalate. It collapsed inward, like a structure whose supports had been quietly cut long before anyone noticed strain. The human finally addressed the room again. Humanity would not remain after the conclusion. There would be no occupation, no enforcement regime, no human oversight council. Once the enemy no longer possessed the ability to threaten existence, humanity would withdraw completely. One delegate asked what would stop humanity from becoming the next threat. The human met the question directly. Nothing external. Only choice. Humanity limited itself because it remembered what unchecked power did to those who wielded it. Fear of becoming the monster was the only leash that mattered. The chamber watched the data stabilize into something no one had expected to see again. An end. The war did not end with celebration. It ended with silence spreading faster than fear ever had. Across regions once saturated with conflict, signals vanished and stayed gone. Not jammed. Not hidden. Gone. The enemy's presence dissolved into absence, leaving behind systems that no longer had anything to resist. The galaxy struggled to process victory that arrived without triumph. Human fleets did not advance into liberated space. They did not claim wreckage or establish patrols. They withdrew along vectors no one could track, folding back into the same obscurity they had emerged from. For many species, the most unsettling part was how little time humanity spent acknowledging what it had done. There were no broadcasts, no demands, no symbolic gestures. The war concluded as a completed task, not a defining moment. Reconstruction councils formed immediately, arguing over borders, reparations, and memorials. Humanity did not attend. Their absence forced other species to confront an unfamiliar responsibility: survival without guidance from the force that had ensured it. Some felt abandoned. Others felt relieved. All felt changed. The human diplomat remained just long enough to deliver a final statement, recorded for archival purposes rather than ceremony. Humanity, they explained, did not seek gratitude. Gratitude created obligation. Obligation created hierarchy. Hierarchy inevitably created resistance. The galaxy needed space to recover without orienting itself around a single axis of power. They clarified that humanity had not revealed everything. What had been used was sufficient, not exhaustive. Restraint had been maintained not out of mercy toward the enemy, but discipline within humanity itself. Power, once normalized, stopped being questioned. Humanity refused to let that happen. Several delegates asked what lesson should be learned. The human paused before answering, as if choosing words that would not be misunderstood. The lesson was not that humans were strongest. Strength was temporary. The lesson was that hesitation had consequences. That postponing endings out of fear prolonged suffering. That waiting for consensus in the face of annihilation was not wisdom. They added one final observation. Humanity did not want to be remembered as saviors. Saviors were invoked when others failed. Humanity preferred a galaxy that never required saving again. One that acted decisively when patterns became clear. One that did not confuse morality with delay. When the human finally departed, the chamber felt smaller. Not emptier. Smaller. As if the scale by which danger was measured had permanently shifted. Species that once dominated debate now spoke more carefully. Military doctrines were rewritten. Defensive philosophies abandoned endurance in favor of adaptability. The memory of how quickly everything had ended lingered like a fault line beneath every discussion. In distant systems, historians would later argue about humanity's true nature. Some would claim benevolence. Others would insist calculation. A few would quietly admit fear. None would be entirely wrong. Humanity had not come to rule. It had come to stop something, then leave. And in that choice, the galaxy learned the most unsettling truth of all. Humanity was not a constant presence. It was a contingency. And everyone hoped it would never be needed again.